Today I want to talk to you a little bit about the thesis statement, introductions and conclusions. This is chapter 3 of your textbook. So what is a thesis statement? A thesis statement makes an assertion or claim about your paper's topic. One of the most important things about it is that it is debatable. The thesis presents the controlling idea of the paper. So if someone was going to ask you what your paper is about, your thesis statement should sum up the entire paper in that one sentence. You should be able to write your thesis statement based on your own thinking and arguments or information from your sources or additional readings. Writing for academics is like math in that it has a specific formula. And the formula to write a good thesis statement is a limited subject plus an opinion equals a thesis statement. Or if you want to get more exact, a limited statement plus opinion plus 3 points equals a thesis statement. So what is not a thesis statement? It's not a fact or observation. For example, people use many lawn chemicals. That's not debatable. It's just a statement that can be verified as true or false. So if that's where you're starting from, you could make that into a thesis like this. People are poisoning the environment with chemicals merely to keep their lawns clean. It does have a limited subject. It's talking about chemicals poisoning the environment and the opinion. So they're doing it just to keep their lawns clean. Also, it is not a title like Social Security and Old Age. Again, that's not debatable. But this would be a thesis that could come from that idea. Continuing changes in the Social Security system make it almost impossible to plan intelligently for one's retirement. So you have a limited subject, which is changes in Social Security, and an opinion. A thesis statement is specific and it is not vague. So here's an example of one that's too broad. The American steel industry has many problems. Too narrow. The American steel industry's problems persist in one major area, its funds. That's too narrow because all you can talk about is money-related things. So you have to expand it a little bit there. So specific, the primary problem of the American steel industry is the lack of funds to renovate outdated plants, equipment, and major properties. So we have a limited subject, which is the primary problem of American steel industry, and the opinion, which is the lack of funds and then the 3 points, to renovate outdated plants, equipment, and major properties. For another example of too broad, Hemingway's war stories are very good. That is debatable, but it's not a good sentence. It's not a good thesis statement. So more specific, Hemingway's stories helped create a new prose style by employing extensive dialogue, shorter sentences, and strong Anglo-Saxon words. So again, we have a limited subject, which is Hemingway's stories. An opinion helped create a new prose style, and 3 points by employing extensive dialogue, shorter sentences, and strong Anglo-Saxon words. If you can write a thesis statement that actually has 3 points to it, each one of those points becomes one body paragraph, and you're just that much further ahead. A thesis statement only has one main point rather than several points. For example, Stephen Hawking's physical disability has not prevented him from becoming a world-renowned physicist, and his book is the subject of a movie. Right there you've got two ideas that are competing for the most attention in the essay, and you just can't do that. So to make it 1 point, you would say Stephen Hawking's physical disability has not prevented him from becoming a world-renowned physicist. It's limited subject, which is Stephen Hawking's disability. An opinion has not prevented him from becoming a world-renowned physicist. So how can you develop a thesis statement? There are 3 basic stages that you need to think about when you are writing a thesis statement. First is called the preliminary or open thesis. Second is the tentative or working thesis. And the third is the closed or final thesis. A final thesis statement usually evolves only after considerable reading, writing, and thinking about your topic. So as you go forward, you're very rarely going to end up with the exact same thesis statement in a paper that you started with, just because you'll get different ideas as you read and research. For example, the topic of your assignment is compare and contrast the reasons why the North and South fought the Civil War. So your opening thesis, just to get you started, The North and South fought the Civil War for many reasons, some of which were the same and some different. That's just a start to get you kind of going on your research. As you can see, this sentence kind of reads like something out of middle school, maybe high school, but it's not quite there yet. So after a little bit of research, a little bit of reading on the topic, you come up with this. While both sides fought the Civil War over the issue of slavery, the North fought for moral reasons while the South fought to preserve its own institutions. Okay, we've got a debatable point, and we know that they're talking about two different things about how the North is different from the South. But remember, the prompt said compare and contrast. So it wants to know how they are alike and how they are different. So your final thesis would be, while both Northerners and Southerners believed they fought against tyranny and oppression, Northerners focused on the oppression of slaves, while Southerners defended their own right to property and self-government. So in that one sentence, we know that you're going to be talking about how Northerners and Southerners were alike in the Civil War, and also on what particular points that they were different. The writing tasks vary according to the nature of your thesis. The explanatory thesis is often developed in response to short answer exam questions that call for information, not analysis. So that would kind of be what we saw in that previous example in the previous two slides. The mildly argumentative thesis is appropriate for organizing reports as well as for essay questions that call for some analysis. The strongly argumentative thesis is used to organize papers and exam questions that call for information, analysis, and the writer's forcefully stated point of view. This thesis is used for research papers, and this is the one that we are going to be using throughout the semester. So now that you've got an idea of what to do with the thesis statement, we need to talk about introductions, so actually beginning the essay. Some people like to save writing the introduction and conclusion until after they've written the body paragraphs, because that way they know that their introduction goes with what they have in their body paragraphs. In this case, that will make sure that the student introduces what's in the paper rather than what they had originally intended, because as you know, the thesis can change. And it ties the introduction more effectively to the conclusion by writing them both at the same time. So, attention-getting openings. First, we're going to talk about the hook. When you begin an essay, you have to get the reader's attention. You can do that by getting a startling fact or a little bit of information, a meaningful quotation, a universal idea that's related to your thesis, a rich, vivid description or image, a fresh analogy or metaphor, an interesting anecdote, story, or dramatic episode, so that would be like the storytelling, a thought-provoking question, or beginning in the middle of an action. Now those are both, the last two are ones you have to be careful with because you want to make sure to keep your essay in third person. And your grammar lesson this week will talk about implied you, but this is where we get into some trouble with it. So I want to caution you when you ask questions in a paper. When you write, you must only use first person or third person. First person is the first person pronoun, so I, me, my, mine, myself, we, our, ours, etc. Third person is he, she, it, they, them, their, hers, his, etc. In academic writing, third person is always preferred. But there are times that you're going to have to use first person, especially if you're trying to write it like a narrative about a personal event. But whatever you do, you never use the second person, which is any form of you. And there are a couple of reasons for that. The first reason for that is you do not ever want to address your reader directly. Your reader should fall into your paper by how you've written it. They don't need to be asked specific questions. Are doing your introduction. There are a few things you need to make sure that you avoid. Dictionary definitions. We don't need a dictionary definition of love or of what it means to be a good parent. If you are going to use a definition, it should come from some kind of scholarly article or journal. And make sure you don't identify words that we already know. We know what love is. We know what liberty is. We know what political freedom is. These are things that you don't need a dictionary definition for. And also the rhetorical questions. Did you know, or have you ever wondered? First of all, you have you in there, which is a no-no. And second of all, you shouldn't have to ask if they wonder. Just by putting ideas forward, you should be encouraging your reader to wonder. It happens automatically when the reader reads your paper. They don't have to be shown how to do it. And lastly, this paper will be about, or this paper will prove. You don't ever want to say that because you just say it. You leave those phrases out and begin your sentence, and usually the sentence is just fine without that. Also, you don't want to begin writing your paper or introduction for your paper rather, too far away from your actual topic. So sentences like, there are many novels, all of which have characters. Some characters are heroes and some are not. This stuff is what's called filler. It's fluff that doesn't do anything except add length to your paper. Now there are ways to add length to your paper, but it's got to be meaningful. And you don't want to do a book report list of irrelevant facts. William Shakespeare lived in the Elizabethan era in England. He wrote many plays. One of these plays was Hamlet. Everybody who speaks English knows who William Shakespeare is. It doesn't mean you can't give some background information if you're writing about something, an author or a person. Just make sure it's not the stuff that everybody under the sun knows. Otherwise, it loses its interest. When you are previewing main topics in your introduction, this usually comes into play in the thesis. Make sure they go in the order that you intend to present them in the body of your paper. So what all goes in the introduction? Essential background information about your topic and preparation for your major thesis. And your introduction should be a roadmap for the rest of your essay. Previewing your major ideas and posing important questions that you will consider in your papers do not necessarily have to be in question form. An introduction usually is going to be somewhere between 5 and 8 sentences long. Getting an attention getter and background information and your thesis, that's usually pretty easy to come up with 7 or 8 sentences. The introduction and the thesis sentence. The introduction ends with your thesis sentence. So your thesis statement always comes last. Or second to last in the paper if you need some kind of transition. But usually it's transition enough to the first paragraph. Make special attempts to link the thesis statement to the sentence that precedes it by building on a key word or idea. So this is the idea that your entire paper will flow together. Now we're going to talk about the conclusion. Your conclusion wraps up your argument and leaves the reader with some final things to think about. Effective conclusions often refer back to ideas presented in the introduction, because the main focus of a conclusion is to restate the thesis and highlight the main points. The purpose of the conclusion is to echo to the thesis statement, but not repeat it word for word. So this is restating the thesis. It should move beyond the thesis statement to reflect on significant ideas just presented, and it should indicate why these ideas are important. And those last 2 bullet points are really where I'm talking about for summarizing the main points of the essay. Effective conclusions reflect on how topic relates to larger issues, for example, in the novel, in society, in history. Show how topic affects the reader's life. Evaluate the concepts presented. Issue a call for action on the part of the audience, but make sure you watch out for that implied you. A conclusion must also ask questions generated by the essay's findings. Make predictions, recommend a solution, connect back to the introduction, especially if the writer used a metaphor, anecdote, or vivid image. So if you start with a metaphor or an anecdote or an interesting story in your introduction as your attention getter, if you bring back that attention getter in the conclusion, it makes your paper wrap up nice and pretty, like a pretty Christmas gift. And you can give a personal statement about the topic. Conclusions to avoid. There is a new push in English classes to get away from words like in conclusion or in summary. They don't bother me, but they do bother some English teachers. You do not want to restate the thesis in the exact same words used in the introduction. You don't want to bring up new information or add irrelevant details. For example, if you're not quite at the minimum page yet and you just want to make the paper longer, you don't want to give us information or details that don't really pertain to your thesis.